Shalom, friends. Welcome to the podcast. I think about language a lot. Understanding and translating Hebrew is actually a core part, unsurprisingly, of what keeps me busy and engaged. And in my study of Kabbalah, I often confront the limits of what language can convey. But language isn't just a philosophical puzzle. In our broader culture, it's being used and abused, as we all know, deployed in culture wars, for political division, used in demagoguery, to bring people together, to divide people. Language can also be a form of self-determination, though, of pushing back against oppression. Think of how Jews in the late 19th century reclaimed Hebrew, turning it from a sacred religious tongue into a living secular language. In doing so, they largely turned away from Yiddish, the vernacular of diaspora Jewish life in Europe. Hebrew is the language of return. Yiddish was the language of exile. But in recent decades, Yiddish itself has undergone its own reclamation, not as a language of exile, but of resistance. For many Jews outside or critical of the Zionist mainstream, Yiddish carries a different kind of Jewish identity, diasporic, radical, rooted in solidarity and working class organizing. You may recall my conversation with Mark Rubin, who draws on some of that same tradition in his own protest music. Today's guests are very much in that spirit. Maya and Steph of Brivele are a Seattle-based Jewish duo making Yiddish music rooted in anti-fascist, anarchist, and labor organizing. Their latest album draws from the radical Yiddish writers working in New York between the 1920s and 1950s, and the music is as urgent as anything being made today. The three of us talk about what drew them into Yiddish, how punk shaped their sound, and what it means to perform this music in Jewish spaces right now when the community is so very fractured. It's a rich and sometimes challenging conversation. I'll say up front, my guests hold strong views on what's happening in Gaza, views I don't entirely share, and said so during the conversation. I think the exchange is worth hearing, and I'll let you draw your own conclusions. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy the interview with Brivele. Maya and Steph, thank you so much, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
I had a chance to see you in your very powerful performance at the Portland Jewish Music Festival, not the most recent one, but a couple of years ago. You came down and during a very intense time in the life of the Jewish community. But first, I want to just talk about music. So, Steph, you said that just a moment ago, you told me that you moved from D.C., which has a really maybe still has a pretty vital punk scene. And I'm just wondering if DC has informed your approach to music.
It has entirely shaped my universe. I grew up in the DC area in the 80s and 90s, and Fugazi was really present on my radar. The local DC punk scene. I mean, like, I was young at the time, but I was still aware and going to like basement shows and shows in like record stores. And the DC punk scene is just so they existed. I'm not actually like super on top of what is going on in DC right now because I haven't lived there in 20 years, but more than that. But it's so a response to the status quo of it's a government city. It's the federal government city. And so the punk scene really grew out as a countercultural like response to the mainstream, what is going on, and we're not a fan of it.
Right. Okay, but so that political energy of punk music, DC or otherwise, definitely informs your guys' musical trajectory. Maybe not your sound so much, but your voice, it seems to me. Maya, what about you? Are you filtering in, like, did you grow up listening to punk? It's certainly in your neck of the woods as well.
Yeah, I mean, so we're talking to you from my place, and across the street is Jimi Hendrix's cousin's house. And next door is like the drummer from Sky Cries Mary, which was sort of like the 90s psychedelic rock band of this coast. And then like there's, 5 dad bands down the street, but like in particular from like multiracial Cajun and Zydeco communities. Like there's just a lot happening even just on this street.
Still now. That's great. That's great to hear.
Still now. So like growing up in Seattle, all of those things were the case. And I think especially genres that people are accustomed to thinking are only East Coast or only Southern or whatever. Like there's been such a rich gospel scene in Seattle that isn't acknowledged. I grew up in a family that actually has like long musical lineage, but certainly like raised by folks who were just like, we're not musicians, but like
they're deep appreciators.
Oh my God. Like just
my parents are deep appreciators.
And so literally like my parents will either call me up or Steph will call me up and be like, saw your folks today. Like
that's so great. I love that.
So I love that. Yeah. Like my mom jokes that when I was like in utero, like within the same week, you know, I was at a Bruce concert and I was also at like, you know, I think probably like Mozart and Shostakovich or something.
Right.
And she was like, I don't know, it seemed like you liked both. Like
I have one more question about music itself before we delve into like the politics of it, which I think is obviously important to y'all, an important way to approach your music. But what has the adjustment been like? Because your band has undergone a big change because Hannah?
Hannah.
Is that it? Hannah. So Hannah is no longer with you guys. And I'm just wondering musically, what was that adjustment like and how has it changed what y'all are up to?
I mean, it was really hard when she decided she needed to leave the band. She has 2 young kids. Yeah. And so she needed to change her priorities to address her family. And I'm a believer that you shouldn't have to choose. And, but like, that was what she needed to do. And it was sad for us,
but kind of amazing that she like managed to stay
as long as she did,
and also just I feel great about the way that the 3 of us like navigated that period, which was actually largely in pandemic times, like 2 kids being born basically like mostly in pandemic times. So it was like such a complicated emotional time to be parenting and to be a new parent. And to also be trying to figure out how to still be a musician while keeping everybody safe.
And how even musicians who aren't parents are trying to figure out how to be a musician during like deep pandemic times. Like that was a really depressing time for me. There was the venues, like there are still repercussions of that, of venues have closed, venues have changed their capacity. Like the whole music industry is entirely different from how it was before. I worked backstage as a stagehand, and I was working a show last night for this like classical violin like studio recital, so like student recitals. And the guy who runs the studio says to me, yeah, it's so different than how it was before COVID, like in terms of audience attendance and participation. Like it's impacted every aspect of live music, every aspect.
But so I think one of the ways that I've thought about the transition and what has actually been really lovely about the newest, like the current album of ours, is that half of those recordings are with Hannah and half of them aren't. And so it sort of actually literally documents that transition and kind of honors that transition and honors like moving from that really like core foundational beautiful trio into it. But it's like when I come back to the album, I still am like, I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm like, oh, like, no, like you still hear her with us. You hear like the particularities. For me, that's the most exciting part, is to actually feel like
to continue to channel.
Our work as a trio is still very present for us as a duo.
One of the things that I noticed in looking and listening carefully at your album is I think folks who know Brivele would say, oh, yeah, it's anti-fascist, it's really political. And that's certainly true. But there's a great diversity of music on this album, like some of this beautiful pastoral poetry. It's very romantic. There's a Leonard Cohen song on there that some people will recognize, probably not the Yiddish parts, but as well as the political material. So tell me about the inclusion of that kind of stuff and also the origins of some of the beautiful like romantic poetry that's in there.
Mm-hmm. I have thoughts.
Go on. A quick thought I want to say is yesterday I listened to your interview with Mark Rubin, and there was a thing he said about like not wanting to get hit over the head like all the time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh yeah, I really resonate with that.
I also have Southern Jewish roots, so he and I often talk about these sorts of things and argue about
wonderful.
lots of other things.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think what's fun for us is actually to have a balance, because there's something about a punk aesthetic that's also like, yeah, no, I'm going to hit you over the head with it, actually. Like that is what's happening right now.
And also bread and roses. We need the things that sustain us. We need the things that are beautiful. They're all essential.
I think another way of thinking about it is we're drawing from a really rich lineage of Yiddishkeit and of political, anti-fascist, anarchist, anti-Zionist Yiddish cultural work and literature. And so this album, as with a few of our other albums, is working in sort of a deeper and deepening conversation with a particular community of Yiddish writers that for a time called themselves Prolet Pen. And I think from my perspective, they were essentially kind of anarcho-socialist writers. They were writing between the 20s and the 50s, largely in New York City. And so they have such a specific voice that is from, Turtle Island is from this continent. It's from like what Yiddish was doing when it met this particular place, which I think is important for us as Yiddish performers with long roots here, that we're interested in the Yiddish that grew here as opposed to the Yiddish that grew differently in Europe, for example.
Interesting. Yeah.
And that those writers were profoundly political writers. They were profoundly radical in their articulations of solidarity with anti-fascist work, fighting Franco in Spain, and also in early civil rights and like multiracial political anti-capitalist movements here, and immigrant organizing in labor and all of those things. And also like we've included a love song from a writer in that collective, right?
Right.
Because
because those writers were human, and they human beings, and they had
also,
love.
Like the love song, like I don't think that it's by accident that this love song feels the way that it does, because of the coalition of writers, committed to what they're committed to. Like it's not just like, Dora Toivoboim is gonna write an incredible text around solidarity with Scottsboro, etc. And then on the side is going to be like, but I also like kissing my friends. Like Dora has like just such a beautiful repertoire of like kind of smutty Yiddish poems, and they're really fun. And this one is a very sweet one. We encourage you to look at other ones. We encourage you particularly to seek out one essentially about a threesome in a car. And we're sorry to have to say, like, we haven't set that one yet,
This
like,
is not that one.
This one is not that one. But it's just like, what does it mean, to be a woman at that time who's able to write these poems that I think even when they're not explicitly sort of about a more radical approach to relationships and a romance myth and sex, like it's still present in that love song of like that kind of way of thinking about how you want to be a person with other people.
That's very interesting. I don't know anything about her. Dora is the author.
Dora Toivoboim.
Yes, that's great. Well, anyway, it's. I will now look out the smuttier stuff. So thank you for
and it's
that.
Also it's a form of world building, of creating the world that we want to envision, the better world that's not like our present fascist moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You mean the inclusion of that kind of work, or you mean just that kind of those kinds of poems and songs?
All of the above.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
We want a fullness. A fullness of articulating of like how we want to be together. That's a much more effective anti-fascist resistant position, is to also be saying like, but what do we want? Can we imagine beyond the strictures that we're living in now? And I think we started in this very living room in 2016 because, the first election of our current fascist context had happened. And what we knew intuitively at the time was we needed to be deepening our understanding and our engagement of a lineage of anti-fascist, anarchist conversations. And we wanted to do that musically. And
as an immediate response to what was happening in the
and we
United
knew that
States.
we needed to know, we needed to be playing these songs so that we could know more about the fullness of the context in which they came from, in order to model for ourselves that we have to be world building now.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to articulate how things could be different than they are now.
Yeah.
And there is such a deep treasure trove of Yiddish anti-fascist songs. And it's because these writers, these singers, these performers envisioned a better, different world.
Shalom, friends. It's me, Rabbi Josh. And I wanted just to interrupt this interview because I have a brief message and request. We believe at Art Lab that the work that we're doing of helping to incubate and to foster and create expressions of Jewish culture for the 21st century is really, really vital. It's so important at this moment in Jewish life and in American life, in global life, that those who can offer a different perspective about Jewish identity and what it means to be Jewish have a platform to do that and can express themselves without fear and with authenticity and with a wide variety and diversity of opinions. And so that's what we're doing at Art Lab. We need your help. And one of the best ways that you can help is to spread the word about this podcast. So if you would share this podcast, if you like what you hear, you want to share it with a friend, somebody you think would be interested. And if you have not subscribed, please subscribe to the show. And if you do subscribe, please just take a moment to rate and to offer a comment or a review on the podcast. It just takes a quick minute. It helps us enormously. It's the way that the podcast grows and reaches more people, which is vital to the work that we do at Art Lab. Thank you so much for listening. Yes, but tell me, what inspired you to turn to your own Jewish tradition in the broader sense? Why did you turn to your Jewish roots to give expression to this contemporary moment?
I'm a secular Jew, and for me,
this is your tradition.
This is my tradition. Yeah. I come from my family lineage is musicians, mm-hmm. and we are Jews. We're musicians, and I always had a hard time figuring out how to fit in. We were very assimilated Jews in the U.S. I never really sought out to be a part of Jewish community when I moved to Seattle. That was not my jam. But then I kind of realized I felt very white culture here in the Northwest is a very different thing than what I grew up with. And I realized I actually wanted to connect with people in Jewish community. And
I see. Because it was sort of organic, or was a little bit in the air in DC in some ways. I think this is a huge difference between mm-hmm. East Coast and West Coast Judaism that's challenging for a lot of people who mm-hmm. have come out this way. But you didn't grow up with...
Steph brings up assimilation as, an element in the decision. And I think there are a lot of different ways to sort of address the violence of assimilation and the ways in which it's complicit in white supremacy. So in growing up in a context where trying to make active choices to undermine white supremacy and to create more effective, less harmful solidarities and more effective multiracial organizing, one way of having to sort of reckon with that complicity and reckon with what it would mean to dismantle whiteness in order to support Black and brown organizing, for example, is to be you have to get really clear about what your lineage is. like whiteness is something that subsumes what heritage are available. And for us, it's very easy to know, like, if you get specific around ancestors, and you can actually get specific around like what ancestors you're choosing and who you want to learn from.
And I had no idea before I moved here what depth of history the Pacific Northwest had with the white nationalist movement.
Yeah.
And that I found shocking, because like I remember growing up in the DC area, some Nazis tried to hold a rally, and like so many people like booed them out, like they didn't even show up. It, like that's just like unheard of.
You didn't grow up with Yiddish, it sounds like.
I grew up hearing Yiddish words, a lot of Yiddish words. I did not grow up hearing Yiddish sentences. And so there was a lot of Yiddish around me, but not actually sentences. So actually, a thing I found really interesting when I started actively studying Yiddish about, I don't know, like 7-8 years ago. I mean, we started the band and we would sing these songs, and I was like, oh, I actually understand a lot more than I realized. And so then I started taking classes, and with a woman in Seattle who would teach out of her living room, Wendy Marcus. And that was before COVID started, and then everything went online. But when I started taking classes, and I realized, oh, like I have, my brain has like the neural synapses for Yiddish words, but it doesn't have the neural synapses for grammar, because I never heard sentences.
Right.
Yeah.
But so the kind of Americanized phrases used to pepper speech here and there, but it sounds like maybe more than the average Jew may have growing up in North America.
And part of the assimilation of my family was like, Yiddish was present, but also there was this kind of like, keep your head down and don't stir the pot. Yeah. And like this like fear of like, they're gonna get you. And so that's why they stay surrounded in like deeply surrounded by in Jewish spaces.
Yeah.
And like where everyone they know is Jewish. Like when I was growing up, you could do like 2 degrees of separation from me and like every other Jew in the DC area.
And so when you came out here, you were, sounds like, yearning, searching for something.
Yes and no, because my community was entirely racist and xenophobic and Zionist and homophobic, and I did not feel welcome in that space.
Yeah.
And so I had no qualms leaving it.
Yeah, I understand. And that, by the way, that might be something that we end up talking about or not, because I'm a Zionist, although I may mean something different than you all do, but we don't know yet. Something that I think about all the time, and that a lot of folks in the Jewish community think about all the time, and that is what is my relationship to my own ancestry and to my own Jewish ancestry. On the one hand, obviously I have a profound love for it, and that's the reason that my life has taken the path that it has. And on the other hand, I do sometimes ask myself, and I think a lot of North American or European Jews ask themselves, well, why should it be that I privilege that ancestry, right? But why? There's also an element in which it does seem arbitrary that I should say, well, that's the one that really is what I'm about. So to help me understand why you all have why we choose one to so profoundly shape our worldview when the others are just as authentic.
I mean, I think for me, what this brings up is that I think we're so quick to conflate sort of privileging or centering one aspect of ourselves over another with just refusing to erase it, right? And so I think like it comes from a really insecure, like assimilationist place to be like, well, but like, why would I privilege my Jewish identity over other things? And it doesn't feel to me ever in my experience that that's what's happening. It's just that we live in a context, in such a white supremacist and assimilationist context, that even profoundly engaging with who we are is seen as sort of like performatively centering our Jewishness over other things. Like we live as like queer, anti-Zionist, like, and Jewish and all of the
fully
like
intersectional
fully
people.
ourselves, and that is the only place from which we can make work, right? And so the fact, I think it's also kind of like a enforced monolingualism that also goes like, because you're singing in Yiddish, you're sort of like making that the bigger deal. And it's just like, well, we also sing a bit in English. And like the fact that one insists upon having a relationship to a heritage language, you know, it doesn't feel like it's sort of inauthentically or sort of forcing a particular kind of prioritizing. It just is saying like, actually, I think it should be fairly normal to get really present, which with all of the ways in which you're constructed as a person in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And so I often think like that question gets us to interesting, like the question you just posed gets us to interesting places, but it gets us to interesting places because actually it's the wrong question. Like, it's just like, well, we're showing up as our full selves. And I think it's more the cultural context that makes people say like, why are you being so Jewish?
And for me, when I was in college, I decided to study Russian because I was told by my family, we came from Russia, we fled the Tsar. And so I was like, oh, let's study Russian. And then I spent a summer abroad in Russia in 2002 when that current fascist had just gotten into his position. I can't believe he's still freaking there. And I don't know that anyone saw the nightmare that would become. But when I was doing this study abroad, the host family that I stayed with asked, oh, what's your family background? What's your religion? I said, oh, well, we're Jewish, and we came from what I had only then recently learned was not Russia, or it was the Russian Empire, and it's what is now Ukraine, Poland, Belarus. I have a better understanding of that. And they were like, oh, you're not Russian, you're Jewish. And like there was a thing that was kind of like clicking in my brain around that time where I was like, all right, I need to like really think about what's going on right now. And what was going on was Russian was the language of empire. It was a language that people that like my people learned to speak in order to communicate with the people that were in power over them, just like we learned to speak English when we came to the States. And so it's this form of how do we really reclaim this language that empire has taken from us, that genocide, that pogroms have taken from us. How do we really like dig into our full selves? And
it's really a very profound idea. And one of the things that's interesting to me, I think the reason I meditate on this question so much is that Yiddish was not the language that we initially spoke. And it also was the result of an empire scattering us. I mean, we didn't end up speaking Latin, but because of the Romans, we went elsewhere. And so I'm always interested in how we attend to our different identities and try to sort through which are the ones that feel most authentic to us. So that's where my question is coming from.
Yeah, and just not to be scared of our like hybridities and like heterogeneities, right? Like
right.
Like much less interested in questions of authenticity, frankly, and much more interested in the places like the borderlands where complex things meet inside of each other, or that allows us to do like deeply coalition building work, right? Like
right.
We're all of the things that we can know and see about ourselves, and we're also all of the things that we can't see about ourselves and others. Yeah. And that's not scary. That's just true. And it's messy. And I think that's what makes the work we do compelling.
I went to a concert a number of years ago where the singer sang entirely in Quebecois French. I didn't understand a word she said, but I was so touched by her concert, by her performance. I could feel every emotion that she sang. And I firmly believe that you don't need to understand all or even any of the words a person is saying to really like connect musically and to connect with a person on an emotional level. And I feel I have this like conflicting, like these competing beliefs that I believe firmly in that, like, you don't need to understand. And I also believe firmly in wanting people to understand. And so that's why in part we do sing some things in English. And we do provide a lot of explanation in our live concerts for what we are presenting to people.
One of the things that I would say is that from the beginning, I think we were really interested and committed to storytelling, basically, and that literal compositions and the songs themselves are storytellers, but also we have the ability to curate something that uses lots and lots of different storytelling tools. And so oftentimes, you know, performances are a real sort of multimodal approach to like how does this collective space that we're making with, you know, like that reciprocal relationship with an audience. Like, this is a storytelling space. This is an evening where we're going to be telling really particular stories with very particular implications to our lives now. And so I think that's one answer, is just that we have so many tools available to contextualize and co-create a space where these songs can live in an enriched like way that people can understand regardless of what their lineage is and what their experience, their linguistic experience is. But the other thing that I would say is that I don't encounter any community like for whom where there's no experience in sort of heritage language reclamation, right? That's actually a really profound point of intersection, and that people really understand, like, it is really important to say the words of your ancestors, and that in doing that, that creates important possibilities, and it creates a very real, truthful place to connect across communities. And so there's an incredible like Lushootseed language reclamation process that's been happening my entire life in like these places that are stolen places from Coast Salish peoples. And so many other immigrant communities are dealing with like, how do we maintain our language and our culture even as we're here? And also, how do we flourish and have our heritage languages like shift and change and flourish with a new context? And essentially the question of like, how do we survive as diasporic people and in a way that enriches and like the ability of indigenous people to be living, right? And so like, I think that in a sense, like heritage language reclamation and being in conversation on that level actually is a really fecund meeting point between diasporic people and indigenous people.
Yeah, right. So you're saying folks may not have Yiddish in common, but people have in common the ways in which they've been shaped by language, that maybe a yearning to reclaim or rediscover languages of their ancestors, that's something that they have in common.
But also, you assume as a rabbi, read and study biblical Hebrew and Aramaic, and like that's a language that you study and recite and speak, and so like you clearly, I assume, have a connection to that language, and that is meaningful for you in a rabbinic way.
Yes.
I think this is an interesting point for me because like I also study Talmud, and I also like I have a lineage of Chazonis in my family, and so that's like an aspect of my life now. And so what I think is really interesting is like there are really interesting relationships to language outside of kind of like dominant understandings of fluency. And so I think that there's actually like there are experiences that people have like reading and listening to Yiddish literature, for example, as someone who doesn't understand all of it. And yet there's something that's happening in the experience of getting to hear and speak those words that is actually akin to someone who is like, I must say Kaddish, like, for my dead. And it is not because I know what the words of Kaddish mean, right?
Yeah.
And so really intuitively understanding what, for example, a Jewish relationship to ancient liturgy is, if you are not a speaker of Aramaic or Hebrew, like, why is it that people still need to go into shuls and kals and say these words?
Yeah, yeah.
Language means so many different things to so many different people in so many different contexts. Yeah.
What has it been like over these very fraught last few years to try to be in community while also holding and sometimes advocating beliefs that are uncomfortable for a lot of people in the community?
Well,
what do you do, and also what are your limits? Like, to what are you ever at a point where you're like, you know what, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to be so open-armed and friendly, or we're going to draw our boundary lines.
For context for the listeners, so the show that you're talking about, we were in Portland playing the Portland Jewish Music Festival in, I think it was November of 2023.
Wow, was it really?
I believe it was
just right then.
yeah.
Was it a month after?
The outset of the genocide.
Yeah.
Right.
So the genocide of Gaza had just started happening, and we needed to say something. And I was so touched by how many people came up to us after the show and really thanked us for holding space, for acknowledging the trauma that was happening, that was really like being incited by a country that claims to speak for all Jewish people. And we don't want to have any part of that. And there was just like so many people came up to us afterwards and were just so appreciative for the things that we said during the show to acknowledge what was going on. And so like, we know that there are so many people who actually do align with us. We are in alignment with so many people politically and emotionally.
So what that show was that we had just lost a friend, both of us, on October 7th.
Yeah,
and
I remember.
That I was in the process of trying to get dear Palestinian friends out of Gaza. And it was literally unclear if they would die in the space of the time that we were playing at that concert. And it was hard to be in touch. And it was also, when we were in touch, there were very real moments of like, beyond the days and weeks of not sleeping and how many hours it took to potentially get beloveds out of Gaza, literally, that there was also conversations of like, what should we be doing? Like, what should we be doing? And a very explicit blessing of like, you need to go into spaces and you need to tell like my story. And like, in advance of that show, I had explicit permission to like share some writing from a friend who was still stuck under bombs. And so one answer to your question is, when in deep relationship with Palestinian community, there is an ask for using our platform in a particular way. And another answer to the question is, I hear so much framing these days of like how difficult it's been to be a Jewish artist since October 7th. And on the one hand, like, the first thing that I chafe against is just the frame of a beginning at October 7th, right? Like, just deciding where you start is such a complicated thing. And so when you understand the ongoing Nakba, like this is like October 7th isn't the beginning of anything for anyone. And we say that as people who understand like really profoundly what October 7th was, right? Like it's not said from a flippant place. And the other thing is just like, I tire of our, like, I'm disinterested in talking about it being difficult to be in this moment as a Jewish artist. Like, that is not where the urgency lies for me, you know? Like, when there's an ongoing genocide of Palestinian people and Palestinian culture, like, I don't need to linger on what is difficult for me to navigate, you know?
Okay.
And then I don't say that because I don't think it's really important to reckon within Jewish community, like how to be making spaces that can really shift our community towards an active refusal of complicity and genocide, right? Like, I think like turning towards one another in generous, curious, but rigorous ways, I think is really important. So I'm not sort of trying to say that engagement is irrelevant, and I'm not trying to say that people shouldn't be honest that they're reckoning in this moment. But I do think like I wonder why we're not as curious about what it's like to be a diasporic Palestinian artist in this moment, right? Like, it's just like there's just so many aspects to what's going on, and for me, we're trying to make choices about how we try and engage honestly and resistantly in mixed spaces, and also to strengthen other sorts of spaces. But I'm less interested in sort of these kind of questions that can sometimes become a little bit navel gazing. And I'm more interested, like, you know, like, let's all just be trying to show the fuck up.
I get it. I really hear what you're saying, and trying to be, you know, responsible and using your voice in that way. And yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody has any time for navel gazing, but I am curious, having heard what you just said, I'm just curious to help me understand your answer. Have you guys lost opportunities or work to your awareness because you're Jews?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think that some of it may have to do with, your politics. And so I'm just pointing out the fact that I don't think we ought to pick and choose between seeing what's happened in Gaza and being aware that because of what's happened in Israel, people who aren't making work that is necessarily has to do with Israel at all have lost artists who are losing opportunities and losing their living because of stuff. So I think when people, because of anti-Semitism or because people assume that this person must be a Zionist. So I'm just sort of advocating for some of the artists I know and some of the people I'm in community with and some of the people who listen to the podcast to recognize that sometimes it's not necessarily navel gazing, and it's not necessarily just like, you know, privileged snowflakes saying, oh, poor me. But, you know, people are responding to real things in their lives that and lost opportunities. And it's not that they think necessarily that being having it being difficult artist is the most difficult thing in the world right now. But I think it's legitimate for people to talk about that.
It's legitimate for people to really actually have to reckon deeply with like where, like, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is a really important articulation of like nonviolent Palestinian resistance to occupation, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, right? And there's a lot of complex discussions of sort of like what are the values aligned ways that you can put pressure that actually is political pressure, using arts and culture and academia as like a sphere that is actually profoundly linked to like power and governments in terms of funding and all of those things. So to really get clear and in the muck of the details of like, are opportunities being stripped from people because of anti-Semitism, or opportunities being stripped from people because they're explicitly getting Israeli governmental funding, or they are, using a platform that is actually like around like bolstering Zionism as an ideology rather than Jewish culture in general, or, so I think like those are really important conversations to just have like in the specificity of it, right? Like to not get too broad so that people aren't talking about real things, but just like those really specific ways of balancing. And also to be real that, for like, for more than 20 years, much longer, that Jewish artists who aren't Zionists have been losing opportunities precisely because of that. And so there's just like so many ways to get into this conversation, which I think is important.
Right.
And also,
I think that's true. And by the way, though, just to be clear, there could be Jewish artists who are not Zionists who are also not getting work. So I just think it sometimes doesn't fall as neatly into these categories of just and unjust as we would like it to. And that's why things like anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred are so painful, is because they often don't see us for the fullness. They put us into boxes and we're not seen in the fullness of who we are, whether we're Jews or Palestinians or, African Americans or whatever. That's all I'm pointing to. The other thing is, I don't make it a habit of like quibbling about politics with my guests, but I just do want to say for the record that I don't see what's happening as a genocide. I think that there's a lot of different vocabulary that one can use to rigorously and accurately describe what's happened, including war crimes, et cetera. But I just wanted to say for the record, not because I'm trying to persuade you, I do not see what's happening as a genocide, but I think that one can decry what's happened. One, especially Jews, have a special responsibility, I think, to tend to what's happened and to be a voice for it. But I just wanted to get that on the record. And having said that, I'll just, if you want to respond, I'll give you the chance to do so, and I won't answer back on this topic.
I think the only thing that I would say is just that, like, on the record, like, it is a genocide, and that also we're really glad that people who are listening to your podcast who will resonate with you also hear us loud and clear, and also that people who maybe don't listen to the podcast quite as much and don't feel as comfortable in spaces that you feel comfortable in can also hear us loud and clear and see that we're talking.
And I'm also
go
wondering about the specificity for vocabulary. And while I do believe what's happening is a genocide, I also wonder why it's important for the name to be accurate. What's happening is people are being murdered, and we should do something about it. Whether or not it's called a genocide, like, people need to step up and make it stop. And each of us are experiencing reality in a different way. You're responding to your reality, and I'm responding to my reality. And so we're all responding to our realities. And is it possible that all our realities can be correct?
I don't know.
Okay, yeah, that's. I'll just let that hang out there as a question. So, what are you working on now? And do you are you brewing up another album? This album. When did this album come out?
It came out a year ago. It came out May 1st of 2025.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have other material you're working on?
Yeah. We are going into the studio next week to record a few tunes. I have no idea what the timeline in which you release these podcasts are, but
every week.
Oh, okay. So yeah, next week we're going to record a few tunes, not a whole album's worth, but a couple of the newer songs we've been working on. And
so one answer is, another album will be forthcoming
eventually,
soon, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And we also, coming out of number of tunes on this latest album, have wanted to sort of share more of like the kind of deep research that we do in preparation for the tunes that we share. And so we actually, coming out of an artist residency that I had here in Seattle at Town Hall a couple of years ago now, were able to present a lecture at Yiddish New York this past December, talking about some of our research around the anti-fascist lineages of some of these tunes. And so we're actually going to get to do a version of that lecture again at Pleasant.
A festival in Western Massachusetts.
Oh, wonderful. Oh,
At
that's
the
so
beginning
cool.
of July.
Yeah. Part of the answer to that question is being interested in sharing the sort of scholarly research that we engage in as artists.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing these sort of lecture performances that we're interested in continuing to do, and being invited to universities and those sorts of things. So if anyone's out there who wants to bring us, please let us know.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because I was imagining that since this music is not just like, you're not going to turn on your local radio station and hear some of the stuff, that there is an amount of probably very joyful and cool research that you guys do, and that seems like one of the side benefits of the work that you do. I just wanted to end. The last song on the album is such a lovely tune, and I love your version of it.
We're talking about the last song on our album is called Cable Street, and it's about the Battle of Cable Street in London, England in 1936, when fascists marched through the city, through the Jewish East End. And the song was written in, I forgot the exact year, but in the last 10, 15 years by a band in England called the Young'uns.
In Stockton,
England. And they wrote it based on the remembrances of a survivor of the Battle of Cable Street named Johnny Longstaff. And his son is someone we've been in touch with, Duncan Longstaff, who
and that's his blessing.
He is friends, he's in community with the Young'uns, and there's like all this like archival material.
So actually, if listeners are interested, the Young'uns actually produced an entire show, like a song cycle that was based on Johnny Longstaff's oral history, which you can also find in British archives. So what's lovely about it is that it sounds like such an old tune, but it's actually the real continuity of a living folk tradition of balladry that tells stories that need to be told.
Wow, that is, it definitely has the feel and the poetry of like an old, I assumed it was written in the 20s or something like that. I don't know. Just tell me about the choice to end on that piece, because it fits in with your guys, with your music, but it's not like a traditional Yiddish folk song. So tell me why you chose to end on that piece.
I remember when we were putting the album together, like we'd recorded all the songs and then we were like, what order do we want to put them in? And we were confident we knew what order they were going to go in. And then we listened to them in that order and we're like, no. And then
But what I'll say about our process around that is like we leave space for sort of like the intuitive, like sonic reality of like what just makes sense. Like in your kishkis when you're listening to it, like what's the flow? But we always start often with a somewhat cheeky or like facetious, but it's like, what's the story we're telling? And so we will like storyboard like what we think this album is talking about, and then like lay out our songs to actually effectively tell that story. And
beautiful.
But I think Cable Street really felt to us like it was a final word in that moment. Like it was really a place to like leave.
Because the last word of the song, the last words are no pasarán. They shall not pass.
Yeah. That's great, because the title of your album comes from a lyric in the first song, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And what I loved about the last song, in addition to your guys' harmonies and how you perform it, is just it's a song of real solidarity in which Jews are among, but not the only folks who are victimized on this day. And it's very much about people coming together to fight fascism. And so I felt like it was kind of the perfect end note for that piece.
And in a way, they're in an interesting conversation with Zumplan Brider, which is the song before it, which is the Yiddish translation of Moor Soldaten, Pietbog Soldiers, which is another song that's about anti-fascist, anti-Nazi organizing in a mixed community, and was originally written in German, not by Jews, of the first song that was ever, to our knowledge, written by prisoners of a Nazi concentration camp.
Wow,
And
that's so interesting. Yeah.
One of the things that our lecture does is it tells the story of how that German anti-Nazi song made its way into Yiddish. I think it's important that in both cases, we were asking the question, what does it mean to be singing a song of solidarity, but also of mutual struggle? Both can be true, written not by Jews, and to be doing it as Jews and as Yiddishists.
Right.
And I think that that's a really live, like, rich question to be asking. And it was such a privilege to be able to sing these songs that are not Jewish songs, but to sing them as a part of our repertoire and in honoring that.
We'll put links and all that stuff in the show notes so people can get to your music and see some YouTube vids of you all playing. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Shane and Ben.
All the best. Bye.